My name is Arthur Wells. I'm 54 years old now, but this happened 12 years ago, back when I still thought I understood the world. I spent 30 years of my life as a geological surveyor, which is a fancy way of saying I walk through wilderness that most people only ever see on a postcard. I've been all over this country, from the swamps of Florida to the deserts of Arizona, but my heart was always in Wyoming. The mountains there, especially the Bridger-Teton range, they were my church. I knew those woods better than I knew the streets of my own hometown. I could read the land, identify scat from 100 yards, and tell you what kind of bird was singing just by the tune. I was a hunter, a fisherman, an outdoorsman. I was competent. I was rational. And I was wrong about everything. That October, my best friend Cal and I planned our annual elk hunt. It was a tradition stretching back 2 decades. Cal was a retired mechanic, steady as a rock and just as quiet. He didn't say much, but when he did, you listened. This year, though, was different. Cal's sister had asked if her son Brian could come along. Brian was 22, fresh out of college with a business degree and a personality that was about 90% cheap cologne and 10% bravado. He'd hunted once or twice with his dad as a kid, but thought he was Daniel Boone incarnate. Cal was hesitant, but family is family, so we became a party of 3. We drove my old Ford F 250 deep into the national forest, miles past where the asphalt gave way to gravel, and then miles further until the gravel road was just 2 ruts in the dirt. Our spot was a place Cal and I had used for years, a small clearing next to a creek nestled in a valley that was a natural funnel for game. It was isolated. That was the point. No weekend warriors, no hobbyists, just us, the mountains, and the quiet. The air was cold and sharp, smelling of pine and damp earth. It felt like coming home. We spent the first day setting up camp. 2 sturdy canvas tents, a fire pit lined with river stones, and a meat pole strung high between 2 thick pines. Brian tried to be helpful, but he mostly just got in the way, making too much noise and asking questions he should have known the answers to. He'd brought a brand new, top-of-the-line rifle with a scope that looked like it belonged on a telescope. He kept bragging about its sub-MOA accuracy at 1,000 yards. Cal just grunted and told him he'd be lucky to get a clean shot at 100. I tried to show Brian how to properly stack firewood to keep it dry, but he waved me off, saying he knew what he was doing. He then proceeded to build a pile that looked like a game of Jenga played during an earthquake. Cal and I exchanged a look. It was going to be a long week. That first evening was perfect. We sat around the fire, the flames crackling and spitting sparks into the ink-black sky. The stars were so bright they looked like holes punched in a blanket. We ate venison stew from last year's hunt and drank coffee boiled over the fire. Brian was on his phone trying to find a signal, complaining about being disconnected. Cal told him to put it away and just listen. "This is the only signal you need," he said, gesturing to the forest around us. For a moment, Brian actually did. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the whisper of the wind in the pines, and the distant gurgle of the creek. It was a profound, almost holy silence. And then the silence was broken. It was a sound from deep in the trees on the other side of the creek. It was a hollow, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a woodpecker. It was too slow, too deliberate. It sounded like someone was hitting a large, dead tree with a heavy log. The rhythm was what was so unsettling. It was steady, almost methodical. 3 distinct knocks, A pause of about 10 seconds, and then 3 more. Brian laughed nervously. What was that? Somebody else out here? I shook my head. No one comes this far in. Not to this spot. We hadn't seen another vehicle, another footprint, another soul for the last 10 miles. Cal was leaning forward, his head cocked, his expression tight. He was listening with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. The knocking continued for another minute, then stopped as abruptly as it had started. The profound silence rushed back in, but now it felt different. It felt heavy, watchful. Probably just a dead branch falling, Brian said, a little too quickly. He was trying to sound confident, but his voice had a slight tremor. Wind's picking up. I looked up at the treetops. The pine boughs were barely swaying. There was hardly any wind. Cal didn't say anything. He just stared into the darkness beyond the firelight, his hand resting on the stock of his .30-06 that was leaning against his camp chair. Could be a bear, I offered, trying to find a rational box to put the sound in. Sometimes they'll push on trees to mark territory. Maybe it's just knocking a loose one. Even as I said it, I knew it was a weak explanation. I've been around bears my whole life. I've heard them roar, huff, and crash through the underbrush. I've never heard one make a sound like that. It was too clean, too rhythmic. It had the cadence of intent. Cal finally spoke, his voice low. Whatever it was big, and it wanted us to know it was there. He stood up. Let's douse the fire a bit. Don't want it too bright. We kicked dirt over the edges of the fire, shrinking the circle of light. We all felt it, the feeling of being watched. That night, I slept with my Remington 700 next to my sleeping bag, a round in the chamber. The next morning, the world seemed normal again. The sun was bright, the air was crisp, and the unsettling feeling from the night before felt like a ghost story told around a campfire. Brian was back to his usual self, joking that we'd been spooked by Bigfoot. Cal and I decided to do some scouting. We left Brian at camp, telling him to stay put and not wander off. We crossed the creek, which was shallow and fast-moving, and headed in the direction of the knocking. The forest floor was a carpet of pine needles and damp leaves. We moved slowly, our eyes scanning for sign. About a quarter mile from the creek, we found it. A game trail, well used by deer and elk. But crossing it, pressed deep into the mud, were tracks. My blood ran cold. I knelt for a closer look. The print was massive, at least 16 inches long. It was vaguely canine, with 4 distinct toe pads and a large heel pad. But it was all wrong. The shape was too elongated. The claws marks looked more like talons. And worst of all, the spacing was completely off. I followed the line for about 20 feet. The stride was enormous, nearly 6 feet between steps, and they were in a straight line, one directly in front of the other. It was a bipedal gait. Cal, I said, my voice barely a whisper. He was already there, kneeling beside another print. His face was pale. He pulled a small tape measure from his pocket and laid it next to the track. 16.5 inches, he murmured. What in God's name makes a track like that? I shook my head, my mind racing. A bear? No. A bear's hind paw is long, but the gait is a rolling shamble, not a straight line. The front and back paws overlap. This was different. This was something walking on 2 legs like a man, but with the feet of a wolf from hell. We looked at each other. The rational part of my brain was screaming for an explanation. A prank? Someone on stilts with fake feet out here in the middle of nowhere? It was absurd. The alternative was even more so. Cal stood up and scanned the trees. I don't like this, Art. Not one bit. We decided to follow the tracks, but cautiously. They led us deeper into the woods, up a slight rise. The thing was heavy. The prints were sunk a good 2 inches into the soil. As we followed, we noticed something else. Broken branches about 7 or 8 feet off the ground. Not snapped by wind or snow load, but broken downwards, as if something tall had simply pushed its way through. The trail eventually petered out on rocky ground. We lost the tracks. The feeling of being watched was back, 10 times stronger than the night before. Every shadow seemed to hold a shape. Every gust of wind sounded like a breath. We decided to head back to camp. The excitement of the hunt was gone, replaced by a cold, primal dread. We were no longer the hunters. We were being scouted. When we got back to camp, everything looked normal at first glance. Tents were standing. Gear was where we left it. But then I noticed my cooler, a heavy-duty Yeti I used for food storage, was a few feet from where I'd left it. The lid was closed, but the rubber latches were unhooked. I always secure the latches, always. A bear would have torn it to shreds trying to get in. It would have been covered in claw and bite marks. This was clean. The lid had been lifted and then placed back down. I opened it. A package of bacon was missing. Nothing else was touched. "Brian!" Cal yelled. Brian emerged from his tent, looking annoyed. "Did you go in my cooler?" I asked, my voice tight. He scoffed. "No, why would I?" Cal pointed at the cooler. "It's been opened. Bacon's gone." Brian's face went white. I was in the tent the whole time, listening to music on my headphones. He hadn't heard a thing. Something had walked into our camp, in broad daylight, opened a cooler, taken one item, and left, without making a sound. My stomach turned to ice. A bear doesn't unlatch a cooler. A human prankster wouldn't be so subtle. That night, none of us talked about hunting. The mood was grim. We ate in silence, our rifles within arm's reach. Brian had finally lost his bravado. He was quiet and jumpy, his eyes constantly darting towards the tree line. We built the fire up high, trying to push back the oppressive darkness. As full dark settled in, the forest went unnaturally quiet again. No crickets, no frogs from the creek. It was the kind of silence that signals a large predator is near. Around 10 o'clock, we decided to turn in. Sleep was a laughable prospect. I lay in my sleeping bag, fully clothed, my rifle pressed against my side. Cal was in the tent with Brian. I could hear them whispering. An hour passed. 2. The only sound was the wind. And then I heard it, a soft, wet, sniffing sound, right outside my tent wall, no more than a foot from my head. It was slow, deliberate, taking in the scent of me. I froze, every muscle in my body locked tight. I could hear its breath, a deep, resonant rumble, like a huge bellows. It was so close I could almost feel the vibration through the ground. I held my breath, praying it would move on. My heart was a drum against my ribs. The sniffing continued, moving along the side of the tent towards the front flap. Then I heard a soft scratching sound. Not the frantic clawing of an animal, but a delicate, inquisitive scrape, like a fingernail testing the zipper. My mind fractured. Animals don't test zippers. I slowly, silently, reached for my rifle, my fingers closing around the cold steel of the receiver. I flicked the safety off. The click sounded like a gunshot in the silence. The sniffing stopped. There was a moment of absolute stillness. Then, a low growl rumbled from just outside the flap. It wasn't the growl of a bear or a wolf. It was deeper, guttural, and filled with a terrifying, intelligent menace. It was a sound of pure hatred. I heard a muffled gasp from the other tent. Cal and Brian were awake. They'd heard it too. The growl faded, and I heard heavy footsteps moving away from the tents, back towards the woods. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, bathed in cold sweat, my rifle aimed at the tent flap, waiting. The next hour was the longest of my life. Eventually, I heard Cal's voice, a strained whisper. "Art, you okay?" "Yeah," I whispered back. "It's gone." "We're leaving," he said, his voice firm. "At first light, we pack up and we get the hell out of here." There was no argument. The hunt was over. Survival was the only thing that mattered now. Sleep was impossible. I decided I'd stand watch. I quietly unzipped my tent and slipped out. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting a weak, reddish light. I threw a few more logs on, coaxing the flames back to life. I sat in my camp chair, my rifle across my lap, and scanned the perimeter. The darkness felt alive, a solid black wall just beyond the firelight. For hours, nothing happened. The forest remained dead silent. Just before dawn, when the sky was beginning to turn from black to a deep indigo, I saw it. A movement in the trees, about 80 yards away, at the edge of the clearing. I raised my rifle, the scope gathering the faint light. At first, I couldn't make sense of the shape. It was tall, impossibly so, and broad. It was standing partially behind a large pine tree. It moved, stepping out from behind the trunk, and my brain simply refused to process what I was seeing. It was a silhouette, dark against the slightly lighter backdrop of the forest. It stood on 2 legs. Its shoulders were massive, at least twice the width of a man's. Its arms were long, hanging down almost to its knees. But the head was what broke my mind. It was long and tapered, with pointed ears silhouetted against the sky. It was the head of a wolf, a giant wolf, perched atop the body of a monstrous ape. It turned its head slowly, scanning the campsite, and I saw the glint of its eyes reflecting the firelight. They glowed with a faint, sickly yellow-green. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it took a step back, melting into the shadows, and was gone. I sat there, my rifle shaking in my hands. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. It was something else. Something that shouldn't exist. I woke Cal and Brian. I told them what I saw. Cal's face was a grim mask. He believed me. Brian looked terrified, but a part of him still seemed to be struggling with it. A wolf head? Art, are you sure? It was dark. Maybe it was a bear standing up and the shadows. It wasn't a bear, Brian, I snapped, my voice harsher than I intended. It was 9 feet tall, and it had the head of a damn dog. Cal put a hand on my shoulder. Easy, Art. It doesn't matter what it was. We're leaving. Now. We started packing with frantic, panicked energy. We didn't bother being neat. We just shoved gear into bags, collapsed the tents, and threw everything in the back of the truck. The sun was coming up, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, but it brought no comfort. The beauty of the sunrise felt like a mockery. We had just finished loading the last of the gear when Cal stopped. He was looking back in the direction of the game trail we had found the day before. "What about the tracks?" he said. "We should get a cast. Proof." I thought he was crazy. "Proof for who, Cal? We need to go." "For us," he said, "so we know we're not losing our minds." Brian surprisingly agreed. "He's right. And maybe we can figure out what it is." It was a stupid, terrible idea, born of shock and a desperate need for answers. Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. Fine, but we do it fast. 10 minutes. I'll go with you, Cal. Brian, you stay with the truck. Lock the doors. Don't get out for any reason. Cal grabbed his plaster kit from his pack and we grabbed our rifles. We jogged across the creek and back to the game trail. The tracks were still there, undisturbed. As Cal knelt to mix the plaster, I stood guard, my rifle up, scanning the trees in a 360-degree arc. The woods were still silent. Too silent. My skin crawled. Hurry up, Cal, I urged. Almost got it, he muttered, pouring the white mixture into the clearest of the prints. As we waited for it to set, a smell hit me. It was a foul, coppery stench, like a slaughterhouse mixed with wet, mangy fur. It was coming from further up the trail. Curiosity, another fatal human flaw, got the better of me. Stay here, I told Cal. I'm going to check something. I moved slowly up the trail, following the horrible smell. It led me over the rise to a small, secluded clearing, and I saw where the smell was coming from. The ground was littered with carcasses, 3 deer and what looked like a young bull elk. They hadn't just been killed, they'd been dismembered, ripped apart with savage, brute force. Torsos were torn open, limbs were scattered across the clearing. But it wasn't the work of a scavenger. The heads had been removed from all 4 animals and were placed in a neat row on top of a large, flat rock. They were arranged to face the trail like a grotesque welcoming committee. My stomach heaved. This wasn't predation. This was a display, a warning. A twig snapped behind me. I spun around, my rifle coming up, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was Cal. He'd followed me. His eyes were wide with horror as he took in the grisly scene. My God, he breathed. Before I could answer, a high-pitched scream ripped through the air. It was Brian. The scream came from the direction of our camp. It was a sound of pure terror, and it was cut off abruptly. We didn't think. We just ran. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces, our lungs burning. As we burst out of the trees near the creek, we saw it. Our camp was a scene of utter devastation, and standing next to my truck was the creature from my nightmares. It was no silhouette this time. It was there in the full morning light, and it was more horrifying than my mind could have ever conceived. It was easily 9 feet tall, standing on 2 powerful, digitigrade legs that bent backward like a dog's. Its body was a horrifying mix of lean, corded muscle and coarse, dark fur, matted with mud and what looked like dried blood. Its shoulders were immense, a solid block of power from which hung 2 impossibly long arms. The arms ended in what I could only describe as hands. 5-fingered hands, like a human's, but oversized and tipped with thick, black, curving claws. But the head, dear God, the head. It was the perfect, monstrous head of a massive timber wolf or a demonic German shepherd, with a long snout, powerful jaws, and pointed ears that were swiveling, taking in every sound. Its lips were pulled back in a silent snarl, revealing teeth like yellow daggers. And its eyes. They weren't the eyes of an animal. They were intelligent. They were aware. And they were burning with a cold, ancient hatred. It was holding Brian. It held him effortlessly in one of its long arms, his body limp and broken. Brian's expensive new rifle lay on the ground a few feet away, its stock snapped in 2. The creature looked at us,
It saw us. It acknowledged us.
Then, with a casual, almost contemptuous flick of its wrist, it tossed Brian's body aside. He landed in a heap near the fire pit, his neck at an unnatural angle. He was gone. A rage I have never known washed over me, eclipsing the fear. "You son of a bitch!" I screamed, and I brought my rifle up and fired. The boom of the Remington echoed through the valley. I was aiming center mass. The 300-grain bullet should have knocked a grizzly bear off its feet. The creature barely flinched. It staggered back a step, a dark patch appearing on its chest. It looked down at the wound, not with pain but with what looked like annoyance. Then it looked back at me, and it let out a roar. It was a sound that shook the very atoms in my body. A terrifying blend of a wolf's howl, a lion's roar, and something metallic, like scraping steel. Cal fired his .30-06. The creature took the hit in the shoulder, spinning it slightly. It snarled and dropped to all fours, its movement shockingly fast and fluid. It was no longer a lumbering giant. It was a sprinter. It covered the 50 yards between us and the truck in seconds, a black-furred blur of speed and violence. We both fired again, our shots wild in our panic. It ignored the bullets and charged straight for Cal. Cal tried to backpedal to bring his rifle around, but it was too fast. The creature slammed into him, its momentum carrying them both to the ground. I saw one of its massive, clawed hands swipe across Cal's chest. His shirt and jacket shredded like tissue paper. Cal screamed, a sound of agony and shock. I ran forward, cycling another round, trying to get a clear shot. The thing was on top of him, its massive head low, its jaws snapping just inches from his face. Without thinking, I aimed for its head and fired. The bullet must have grazed it because it jerked its head back with a furious yelp and spun around to face me. Its eyes locked onto mine, and in that moment, I knew I was going to die.
It left Cal, who was lying on the ground, bleeding and struggling to breathe, and started towards me. It rose back up onto its hind legs, taking slow, deliberate steps. It was showing me how big it was. It was showing me how helpless I was. As it advanced, I saw something that made the scene even more surreal. The passenger side door of my truck was slightly ajar, the window shattered. Brian must have gotten out. He must have tried to be a hero. My eyes darted to the ground near him. His phone lay there, screen cracked. Then I saw the truck. The front left tire was flat, completely shredded. Long, deep gashes ran through the rubber. It hadn't been a blowout. The tire had been slashed. It had disabled our escape before it even revealed itself. This thing was a strategist. It was a hunter. The creature was 10 feet away from me. I fired my last round. It hit the creature square in the leg. The leg buckled for a second, but it didn't go down. It just growled, a low, rumbling threat. My rifle was empty. I started to back away, fumbling in my pocket for more cartridges. It lunged. I threw my rifle at it as a desperate, useless gesture. It swatted the gun away like a fly. The stock shattered against a rock. I stumbled backward, falling over a log. I landed hard on my back, the wind knocked out of me. This was it. The creature stood over me, blocking out the sun. Its shadow fell over me like a shroud. I could smell its foul breath, see the saliva dripping from its jaws. It raised one of its long arms, the black claws extended. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. And then I heard the roar of an engine. I opened my eyes. The creature had turned its head. Cal, impossibly, was in the driver's seat of my truck. His face was a mask of blood and pain, but his eyes were filled with a burning resolve. He had crawled his way to the truck while the thing was focused on me.
He slammed the truck into gear. With a lurch and a groan, the F-250 shot forward, running on 3 good tires and 1 shredded rim. He wasn't aiming for the road. He was aiming for the creature. The creature spun to face the oncoming truck, but it was too late. The heavy steel bumper caught it mid-thigh. There was a sickening crunch of bone and a screech of metal on the rocky ground. The creature was thrown sideways, tumbling through the air before crashing into a thicket of young pine trees. Cal didn't stop. He stomped on the gas, the engine screaming as he fishtailed the truck around, getting it pointed towards the dirt road that was our only way out. "Art, get in!" he screamed, his voice hoarse. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted for the passenger side, diving headfirst through the shattered window. I landed in a heap on the seat, covered in glass. Cal was already moving. The truck lurched and bounced violently, the flat tire making the whole vehicle shake apart. "Is it?" I started to ask. "Don't look back," Cal yelled. "Just don't look back!" But I had to. I twisted in my seat and looked out the rear window. It was pulling itself out of the trees. Its one leg was bent at a hideous, unnatural angle, bone jutting through the fur. But it was getting up. It was still alive. It dragged its broken leg as it started to shamble after us, its eyes burning with a fury that transcended pain. We careened down the dirt track, the truck barely under control. Every bump sent a jolt of agony through my body. I looked over at Cal. His entire front was soaked in blood. The gashes on his chest were deep, horrifyingly so. He was pale, his breathing shallow. His hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "You're hurt bad," I said stupidly. He gave a weak, grim smile. "Just a scratch." We both knew he was lying. "We're not gonna make it," he wheezed, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. "You are. When I tell you to, you jump." "What? No! Cal, we can make it together!" "The road forks up ahead," he said, his voice getting weaker. "Goes down to the main gravel. It's a steep hill. I'm gonna keep its attention. You run." "No!" I yelled, grabbing his arm. "I'm not leaving you!" He looked at me, his eyes clear and steady despite the pain. "My nephew is dead because I brought him here, Art. I'm not letting it get you too. Tell my sister. Tell her I'm sorry." Before I could argue, we reached the fork. It was a sharp turn onto a steep downgrade. Instead of taking it, Cal wrenched the wheels straight. The truck plowed off the track and into the trees, crashing through saplings and undergrowth. "Jump!" he screamed. The passenger door flew open. He must have hit the lock. For a split second, I was frozen. Then instinct took over. I threw myself out of the moving truck, rolling as I hit the ground. I came to a stop in a tangle of ferns and dirt, my shoulder screaming in protest. I pushed myself up just in time to see the F-250, with Cal still at the wheel, slam head-on into a massive, ancient pine tree. The sound was a deafening crunch of metal and wood. The engine died. Silence. And then, from back up the road, I heard it. A guttural, enraged howl. It was coming. I didn't wait. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I ran down the steep hill, my legs pumping, my lungs on fire, tears streaming down my face. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran, leaving my best friend behind. The flight to safety is a blur in my memory. I know I ran for miles on the gravel road. My legs were numb, my body was battered and bruised from the fall.
Every sound was the creature behind me. Every shadow was its form. I remember finally seeing the glint of sunlight on asphalt, the main road.
I stumbled onto the pavement and collapsed. A few minutes later, a logging truck came around the bend. The driver slammed on his brakes, his horn blaring. I must have been a terrifying sight, a man covered in dirt, blood, and tears, babbling incoherently in the middle of a remote forest road. He helped me into his cab and drove me to the nearest town, a place called Pinedale. He called the sheriff on his radio. I was taken to the county sheriff's office. I was in shock, but I told them everything, exactly as it happened. I told them about the knocking, the tracks, the cooler. I told them about the clearing with the deer heads. I told them about Brian and about Cal's sacrifice. I described the creature in painstaking detail. The deputy who took my statement, a young man with a skeptical face, just kept nodding and writing, but he looked at me like I was insane. They took me to the local clinic to get checked out. I had a dislocated shoulder, a concussion, and dozens of cuts and bruises.
But I was alive. A search party was sent out, 2 deputies and a forest ranger. They found my truck, just as I'd described. They found Cal's body inside. They found Brian's body near the fire pit. They found our camp. They were gone for most of the day. When they came back, the sheriff, a big man with a weathered face and tired eyes, sat me down in his office. "Mr. Wells," he said, his voice flat, "we found your friends. I'm sorry for your loss." He paused, shuffling some papers. "The ranger's preliminary assessment is a bear attack, a large grizzly most likely. It happens. People get complacent, leave food out." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "A bear? Did you see Brian? Did you see what it did to my truck tire? A bear doesn't do that. A bear doesn't arrange heads on a rock." The sheriff sighed, a long, weary sound. "Son, you've been through a severe trauma. The mind plays tricks. The site was a mess, consistent with a panicked bear.
The slashes on your tire were likely from the rim after your friend drove on the flat. As for the other details, there was no evidence of any of that. No unusual tracks, the whole area was too torn up. No deer heads, just a couple of carcasses that looked like they'd been fed on by scavengers. They were lying, or they were blind." "My rifle," I said, my voice shaking with anger and frustration. "We fired at it. There will be bullets in it. You can do ballistics." He shook his head. "We recovered your rifle. It was broken, like you said. But we didn't find the creature you described, so there's nothing to match any bullets to. The official report will state that your companions were tragically killed in a bear encounter." I was being dismissed. They were writing it off, creating a neat, tidy story that fit into their world. My truth, the horrifying reality of what happened, was being erased. I was just a crazy old man, traumatized and confused. They told me I was free to go.
A deputy drove me 2 hours to Jackson to get a bus home. As I was getting out of the patrol car, the deputy, an older man who hadn't said a word the whole drive, finally spoke. He didn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead through the windshield. "Listen," he said, his voice a low gravel. "I was a ranger in that forest for 20 years before I took this job. People go missing in those mountains, more than they publicize. They just vanish. We write it up as exposure, accidents, animal attacks." He finally turned and looked at me, his eyes holding a deep, sad wisdom. "You're lucky. You got out. My advice? Go home. Sell your guns. Forget you ever liked the woods. There are things in those deep places that don't have names, and they don't like us being there." Don't come back to Wyoming. He didn't say he believed me. He didn't have to. In his eyes, I saw the unofficial acknowledgement, the quiet confirmation that I wasn't crazy.
And it was somehow more terrifying than their disbelief. That was 12 years ago. I took his advice. I went home to my small house in Colorado. I sold my rifles, my shotguns, my fishing gear. I gave away my camping equipment. I've never set foot in a national forest since. I can't even stand to be in a park after dark. The silence of the trees is no longer peaceful. It's menacing. I live with it every day. The survivor's guilt is a physical weight. I see Cal's face every time I close my eyes. I hear Brian scream. I failed them. I ran. I live because Cal chose for me to live, and that is a debt I can never repay. His sister, Brian's mother, never forgave me. She blamed me for taking her son to that place, for coming back when he didn't. I don't blame her. I blame myself. My life now is small and quiet. I work a desk job. I live in a suburb where the wildest thing you'll see is a raccoon in a garbage can. The world I knew, the world of mountains and rivers and endless sky, is gone. It was taken from me in that clearing. In its place is the knowledge of what's really out there, in the blank spaces on the map. We live on a lit-up paved island, and we pretend the dark ocean of wilderness all around us is empty and safe. It's not. I'm telling this story now not because I expect anyone to believe me. I know how it sounds. I'm telling it because the memory of Cal and Brian deserves more than a footnote in a dismissive police report about a bear. They were good men, and they died fighting something unimaginable. I'm telling it as a warning. If you go into the deep woods, listen. Pay attention. If the forest goes silent, if you hear something that doesn't belong, if you feel that primal sense that you are no longer the hunter, but the hunted, leave. Don't be brave. Don't be curious. Just turn around and run, and don't ever look back. Some things are not meant to be understood. They are only meant to be survived. And survival always, always has a cost.